questions as well when the time comes. All right, all right, all right. Let's see what we're doing here today. We've got a very good friend of the show, Professor Avi Loeb of Harvard University. Avi, how are you doing today in the beautiful Cambridge suburbs?
Oh, it's quite amazing. I wake up at 3 a.m. every day just to go over the 300 emails that piled up in my inbox overnight, and there are lots of interesting surprises. I should tell you. Let me just mention a few anecdotes, if you don't mind. Uh, um, so our dishwasher broke down, and I call to order a new one, and I speak with someone random, and that person says, "Is this Avi Loeb?" And I say, "Yes, it is." And he says, "Oh, I'm following you on all the podcasts. Can you please give me a brief overview of 3i Atlas?" And I was just trying to get a dishwasher. Um, and also, I got a haircut this morning. I go to uh, the woman who cuts my hair, and she says, the boss of my daughter came to her and says, uh, "You need to listen to this podcast with Avi Loeb." And she said, "Well, that's the person that my mother cuts the hair of." And he said, "Are you sure that your mother cuts the hair of Avi Loeb?" So now I cannot really escape, because everywhere I go to a restaurant, people know, and but that, I guess, it's I have to get adjusted to this
Well, you
new.
you can be you can tell them that they're the cosmetologist to the famous cosmologist Avi Loeb. Cosmology and cosmetology share the same prefix. It means beautiful, and it's beautiful to be with you. Got a lot of people watching today, and we're going to be doing a really fun kind of, you know, I don't want to call it a post mortem. This object is still so fascinating, and it's still doing interesting things, and it has taught us more, perhaps, about not only the scientific features of interstellar interlopers, but it's really illuminated to the scientists how the public views these objects and why it's so interesting, why it's so important, what it more may portend for the future. We're also going to get into some of the controversy, some of the criticism, because you've never, said at all that this is guaranteed to be technology, and you can't be in control of what people say about you in your name. However, there is some criticism, some of it legitimate, some of it not, and I want to get into that as an important critical distinction, as a teachable lesson to the audience and to the wider scientific and non-scientific world that pays our salaries as scientists. We have the best job in the world. And then lastly, we'll take a lot of questions from the audience. The only catch is I want to give back. I have a huge audience, members that just pay to be members of the channel, and I love them and I want to give back to them. So if you want to ask questions of Avi, you got to be a member of the channel. It's 99 cents. Not a big deal, but it shows me that you care, and gives me and Avi and the other great guests that we have on the show coming up. I have Terrence Tao coming up on Monday. So these are ways to give back. But Avi, this is incredible. Before we get to the really interesting, details, what we've learned about 3i Atlas in the couple of weeks since we spoke, I want to get into some of the personal side of this object as a scientist, as a human being, as a father, as a human, as a very, very popular popularizer of science, but also a hardcore scientist. Tell us about the latest, kind of gifts that you were bestowed upon, featuring none other than, my other favorite astrophysicist, Galileo Galilei. You know that I've got my finger puppets.
Yeah. Before I get to that, I just need to say that 3i Atlas was an amazing gift, in the sense that it's a big object, bright, coming in the plane of the planets around the sun, and therefore it allows us to monitor everything that happens to it, and that attracts a huge amount of attention from the public. And I see that as an unprecedented opportunity to actually bring young kids to realize that they might want to become scientists, because they see the scientific process of collecting data and being able to infer what the object is. And I get lots of emails from mothers and fathers saying, "My daughter, my son now want to become a scientist." And that doesn't happen very often. Even if the Large Hadron Collider were to discover a new particle, I don't think those kids would come forward with the excitement that they do. And they ask for telescopes as a gift for the holidays. It's really genuine, and I get it from many people. I got maybe a dozen emails over the past week from parents who say, that's remarkable, and we are really happy about that. And the second thing is the public appreciates science. It's not the work of the elite when you have amateur astronomers, where you have lots of data coming in from all directions, hundreds of telescopes around the world, and they get to see how science is done. We don't need to say in advance what we think. We can just follow the data. That is really what science is about. And so if I had to summarize everything, and I did that yesterday, and I'll explain why I did that yesterday. There were 100 people gathered at the Harvard College Observatory for a special celebration that I'll mention. What I said at the end of it is that the foundation of science and art, creative science and creative art, is the humility to learn. It's not the arrogance of expertise. Now, this sounds trivial, but what you find in academia and also among popularizers of science is the arrogance of expertise. So not only I'm an expert, I will tell you what this thing is, but also how dare you speak about a subject that you are not an expert on. Both of these arguments, which are completely irrelevant, because a kid should be able to figure out something that an adult doesn't. And Albert Einstein was not at all within the expertise of the people who dominated physics when he was just 25 and came up with his ideas. It's not about authority. It's not about arrogance of expertise. It's about the humility to learn something new. And as much as this sounds simple, it's really not understood in academia and beyond. And that is the underlying theme. Now, where did I mention this? There was a special celebration of 51 watercolors and two sculptures of Galileo Galilei. The watercolors are of distinguished scientists. And what they said, all of this work of art was produced by Greg Wyatt, a very famous, he's called the America's Rodin. Okay, so he's that accomplished. There is the famous sculpture of the scholar's lion at Columbia University's campus. If anyone visited and they could see it, he is extremely accomplished. He decided to donate those works of art to my office. And now I basically removed all the file cabinets that I used to have. I said, I'm not defined by the past. I had piles of paper that accumulated during the 9 years that I served as department chair of the astronomy department at Harvard. And I just got rid of all of it, including the file cabinets themselves, and emptied my office in order to accept this amazing gift. And I still don't fully understand why he was so generous, because it's basically, things that he created just once, all these watercolors, and he gave it to me. So it's like, he doesn't have it anymore. It's in my office. And, it offers me an opportunity to fundraise by charging admissions to this mini museum that I have, but I will not do that. And we just had a gathering for about an hour and a half, during which he explained what is the creative process for him. And moreover, we had some music, original music composed by David Ibet, who was inspired by the latest images of 3i Atlas. He created a symphony related to 3i Atlas, also related to Oumuamua. So it was a celebration of arts and sciences, the interface between them. And my point is that creativity, both in the arts and sciences, it has similarities. Basically, you have to have an appreciation for things you don't know, for the unknown, and then have the humility to learn about it through your mind, a creative mind, rather than be completely wedded to past knowledge, to things we already know. When you try to pioneer something new, you have to be creative, and you have to be humble in a fundamental way. And
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
that was the unifying theme, and I really enjoyed that. and there were 100 people gathered, and all of them said that it was wonderful. We don't have those events very often,
No.
and so that happened yesterday, and it's a testimony that science could be inspiring to artists. There is actually a manager of a singer, Ollie Swan, in the UK, that is releasing a new single called Aliens Are Real. And his manager approached me and asked me for a blurb that will accompany the release of this song. So it should come out, this month. The other thing I wanted to say is that Greg gave me another gift, which I did not expect at all, and maybe the biggest one. He gave me the foundation and the sculpting tools plus plastilina to create a new bronze sculpture. So I now have the ability to design a new sculpture that later would be made of bronze. So it starts with plastilina, and you create the structure, and then it turns into bronze. And so I decided to call this piece of art. I haven't created it yet. The alien. So I
Mm.
will try to create what I conceive in my mind as an alien being, not necessarily based on science fiction movies, either based on my imagination, or if we ever meet them in the near future, I will obviously try to depict that. Just the way that Galileo Galilei drew the moon, which was a piece of art. His drawings of the moon, which were actually watercolors, is a piece of art. And at the same time, it was at the frontier of science. So if we ever find an alien, I will try to make a 3D model of it in my hands. But otherwise, it will be my imagination, and then it will turn into bronze. So I will work on that as soon as I finish teaching after the first week of December. And that's an amazing
Yeah.
new hobby that, for me at least.
That's great. Yeah, I looked at that. Of course, the famous sketches of the moons of Jupiter, which are not very artistic by Galileo. It's just like basically circles and little dots. But those, five little icons changed the course of science and humanity forever.
Right.
And
That's the moons of Jupiter, but he also did of the moon, our
sure,
moon.
no,
He
sure,
did
yeah. I mean,
six sketches of our moon, which were the first,
that's right,
resolved.
through a telescope. That's right.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Edward Tufte, I think you pronounce his name. He's a well-known kind of expositor, like meta-scientific things. And he called Galileo the father of data science because those images don't only convey the scientific description, but they're also interlaced with the humanity of Galileo, that he was a man. And when he drew the crater, I think it's Copernicus on the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, he drew it. It's like 5 times bigger than it is in reality. But that was intentional. Galileo was a great artist. His father was a musician, as you know, too. And Galileo sketched it, but he sketched it because that's the way it made him feel. In other words, he had the impression that this crater is so magnificent. He wanted to convey that to the viewer that couldn't see it through his telescope. He guarded his telescopes very, very carefully, jealously almost. So he was really the first person to marry, not only to view things telescopically in the heavens, but also to explain what it felt like to be a scientist. And that's part of our discussion today. How does it feel as a human being to go through what you've been going through, almost single-handedly, although not entirely single-handedly, but driving and setting the pace for not only other scientists but the public and even members of Congress. So let's take a little look through what we've learned since in the last 2 or 3 weeks since Atlas made its perihelion approach. Where's Atlas now? What have we learned about it? And has it gotten more anomalous, Avi, or less anomalous?
Well, that's an excellent introduction to the subject. So on October 29th, 3i Atlas passed closest to the sun. A week earlier, it was in solar conjunction relative to Earth, meaning exactly in the opposite side of the sun, almost in the same orbital plane as the Earth. It crossed the ecliptic plane, which is the orbital plane of the Earth, around the sun. It crossed it when it came close to Mars on October 3rd. That's when it got exactly into the ecliptic, which is, again, I mean, all of these are amazing coincidences. So when it came closest to the sun, about 26 days later, on October 29th, it was almost behind the sun, okay, within a few degrees. And so, of course, telescopes from Earth could not look at it because they need at least 30 degrees separation in order to not to be blinded by the sun. And it was too close to the sun, so we couldn't see what happens to it. There were a few observatories that are away from Earth, looking towards the sun. And one of them is SOHO, another one Stereo, and GOES 19. These three took images and realized that, I mean, from these images, the scientists realized that it became bluer than the sun and actually much brighter by about an order of magnitude relative to what it was, before October this year. And so it wasn't yet clear whether it broke up into pieces or not, because it was warmed up by 700 watts per square meter. That's enough to definitely disrupt an icy object made of especially carbon dioxide, which was the main constituent found by the Webb telescope on August 8th, 2025. So at any event, we didn't know much what happened to it. And then as soon as it started being separated from the sun, there were observatories on Earth that started revealing the status of 3I Atlas. And the one thing that was revealed is that it has more than 7 jets coming out of it, tightly collimated jets, which is amazing. You see those jets coming out in all directions, including the direction of the sun and away from the sun. And these jets go out to a distance of 1 million kilometers in the direction of the sun and 3 million kilometers away from the sun. And then I did a simple calculation. Given the fact that the jets going towards the sun have to penetrate through the solar wind, they have to be denser than the solar wind, because we know that the solar wind moves at 400 kilometers per second or so. And we know that sublimated ices on the surface of a rock, if we imagine it being a natural comet, they would acquire at most the speed of sound, or the thermal speed of the particles that get evaporated from the surface. And that's only 400 meters per second. Under best circumstances, it could be much slower than that. So if you take 400 meters per second compared to 400 kilometers per second, you realize it's a factor of 1,000 that more for the speed of the solar wind relative to the jets, according for a natural comet. That means that the jet in the direction of the sun needs to be 1 million times denser, because what matters for the ram pressure is the mass density times the velocity squared. Okay, so the velocity ratio is 1,000, velocity squared is 1 million. So the density of the mass density of the jets needs to be 1 million times more in order to go out that far. And then I can calculate how much mass is being ejected by these jets. And I find that over an area of order 1 million kilometers squared, you need about 5 billion tons of material. And that's huge. And then I ask, okay, if it's 5 billion tons, in order to evaporate these ices, you need some energy, the sublimation energy. So there needs to be a large enough area collecting sunlight such that you would get that much mass evaporate. So I calculated how much energy is needed. Turns out that during the passage of 3I Atlas, which took about a month near pericenter, that's where most of the heating took place, during that time of a month, the area has to be bigger than 20 kilometers on a side, meaning that's for CO2 ice, carbon dioxide. If you consider water, the size of the region that absorbs sunlight needs to be 50 kilometers on a side. That's huge. It's much bigger than the estimated size of 3I Atlas. It's untenable because from the Hubble Space Telescope image, the conclusion was that it's much smaller than that. So what could be the resolution? Well, maybe it's not a single body anymore. It broke up into a lot of fragments. And that's why the surface area, when you sum up all these fragments, the surface area is bigger than the original object. That's one way to resolve it. So I said, did it break up? And then a day later, there was a new image that was obtained from the Nordic Optical Telescope by Dave Jewett and Jane Liu. Very good work that both of them did. And the conclusion of that image that they obtained uh, is from a 2.6 meter aperture telescope, is that it's single. 3i Atlas is still single. It's a single object. They see only light coming from a single object. There is no evidence for breakup. Of course, maybe the pieces are still relatively close and they would get separated by the gravitational tide of the sun. That's possible in the coming weeks. But as of now, it looks as if it's a single body.
But I
So
just
there
want to
is.
interrupt Avi for 1 second, because that was one of the criteria that you stated would cause you to reevaluate a
Oh,
hypothesis that this
definitely,
was a comet.
definitely.
So but I want to point this out. This is what people do that are good scientists. People that are bad scientists, that are cherry picking, that are prone to confirmation bias, will come to a conclusion before the object has we've collected any data on it, and pre-establish a condition based on the scientist that's reporting it. In other words, ad hominem, and personalize the scientific where it should be scientific only. And this is a classic example of that. You didn't say, well, if because Brian Cox is not an astronomer and knows nothing about planetary science, when he called it a comet, 3 weeks before perihelion, confidently saying it's nothing more than a comet, before we had the evidence, he didn't make a falsifiability claim. He didn't say, well, if it actually doesn't break up, that would mean maybe it's not a comet, maybe it's an asteroid, or but he didn't say any of that. He just said it's a comet. Then the data came in, and now he's taking a victory lap. We're going to get to him and Jason Wright and other people.
By the way, I should say that among the emails I received were many Brits, maybe many people from the UK, who apologized to me on behalf of the UK people for the behavior of Brian Cox. That's amazing. I'd be happy to share the emails with you. But and those are distinguished people, by the way, thinking people that are saying his standpoint is not scientific, and he claims to represent science. And this is really unfortunate. He's embarrassing us. That's what they say about Brian Cox. Anyway, coming back to this issue, I definitely say that if the object breaks up, or if a large fraction of the mass of the object gets sublimated, then there is no doubt that it's a natural object, because we will be able not only to infer that it broke up and it was not strong and so forth, but also the composition of the object. If we see carbon dioxide, obviously it's not a spacecraft. So that was my point. Now, with respect to the jets, there are two possibilities. Either these are pockets of ice that were evaporated by sunlight, or maybe these are thrusters. And I'm now saying it's very easy to tell the difference, because when you have sublimation of ice, you get a speed that is at most the thermal speed or the sound speed of the molecules in that gas that comes out of the ice. And that is 400 meters per second. So if we now measure with spectroscopy, using telescopes on the ground, or the Webb telescope or the Hubble telescope, we measure the speed of the jets. If it turns out to be just 400 meters per second or less, then it's definitely a signature that we're dealing with a natural comet. If, on the other hand, we get much larger speeds, then that's what you can get from a thruster, because a rocket has a characteristic exhaust speed of a few kilometers per second. That's what we use. Or an ion thruster of a spacecraft has several tens of kilometers per second. And this is our technology. And of course, if you imagine alien technology being much more advanced, you might find even higher speeds. And when you make the speed higher, you need much less mass density to be in the jets, because they can penetrate the solar wind as a result of the high speed, not as a result of the high mass flux. And so my point is, if it's artificial, you don't need as much mass as in the case of a natural comet, and then everything, the fuel will make up a very small fraction of the total mass. However, in the case of a comet, I get numbers that are not compatible unless it broke up. And that's the reason we see so much mass in those jets. And we shall see. So my point is, in the coming weeks, we'll get even better data, because so far, most of the data that I described was obtained by amateurs. But I'm sure that there are telescopes looking at it right now. And eventually, in early December, we'll have the Webb telescope, the Hubble telescope looking at it. In a few days, my hope is next week we will get the high-rise images obtained on October 3rd by the high-rise camera on board the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. These images were held hostage for 45 days by bureaucracy within NASA. Since there was the government shutdown, the claim is they were not allowed to release those images. They were allowed to release any images that this camera took of Mars because they didn't need processing. However, the images of 3i Atlas required some work, and as a result, couldn't be released as a result of the shutdown. If that's the case, we should get them out within a few days. That's what I hear should happen, and we'll see if they reveal anything. They should have a pixel resolution of about 30 kilometers, so that would be very nice. The other thing I should say is the Nordic Optical Telescope images show an anti-tail all over again. So we see a single object with an extension that is much more prominent towards the sun, not like comets where you see the cometary tail extending away from the sun because of radiation pressure from the sun or the solar wind sweeping up small dust particles or the gas. And in this case, you see mostly an elongation towards the sun. There is a slight elongation in the opposite direction. Keep in mind, the object passed close to the sun just 2 weeks ago. That was the point where the solar radiation and the solar wind peaked in terms of the impact they have on any dust particles or gas particles. So you should have seen the cometary tail in its full glory, the way if this was a comet of the type that we're familiar with. No, it still shows this anti-tail after passing close to the sun. What is going on? And the point is, whenever people say it must be a comet, okay, well, explain to me what is the physics behind those jets? How can they carry so much mass flux? How do you get these jets pointed towards the sun rather than away from the sun? If there is the standard, if they are typical
But
cometary.
even if it is a comet, this is the thing that irritates me about the criticisms from people like Jason Wright and Brian Cox and Michio Kaku and others. You have not said that this is
No,
it definitively not an object from our an ordinary object, a comet or asteroid or some interstellar object. But you've said the opposite. You said if it turns out to be that you are wrong, that it is of completely natural origin, not made by some intelligence, and that was the null hypothesis. That should be the null hypothesis. That you'd be delighted because of how much
yeah,
information we learn about this. Second of
exactly.
all, I don't think you could have anticipated back in March when you and I first started talking about this object, or a little bit after that, maybe,
July, yeah.
that the public would be so enthralled by this object. And
No,
I think there's this effect that people want to shoot the messenger. I mean, that was the famous, tie into Galileo as well. They want to shoot the messenger. Then they want to say, oh, well, everything that you said is wrong from the beginning without data. Then they want to say that if it turns out that you're right, it's despite your efforts,
yes,
to be right. And
yeah.
if they turn out to be right, quote unquote, that their null hypothesis, which is that it's a comet, which is fine, they'll be ecstatic. It's very bizarre, right?
Well,
Because
first I should say, I just today a paper that I wrote about the anti-tail, trying to explain the physics of it, and this is the first one out of two papers. It was peer-reviewed and was accepted for publication in monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. I'm publishing papers trying to explain these anomalies in a natural way. I'm doing my best to try and figure these out. But the people who are attacking the way you describe it, they are not publishing any scientific papers about it. Now, one paper that they wrote actually, and Jason Wright was on it, was to basically say we must contemplate the possibility of technological objects for among the interstellar objects that enter the solar system. So, in other words, they basically reiterate my point while attacking me at the same time for considering that possibility, which you might ask, why is that? And well, they don't want me to get the public attention. That's one thing, out of jealousy probably. And at the same time, they want to be to claim that the argument is theirs. by writing a paper about it. And so you see the hypocrisy here. If you're really enthusiastic about looking for technological artifacts, then you should ask the question whether each and every interstellar object might have some anomalies that would be and if you think it's not, then write a paper explaining it. Don't attack the person who talked. It's not about me, by the way, just to explain. It's about 3i Atlas. That's the focus of the discussion. And
Mm-hmm.
indeed, it's an amazing opportunity to learn about objects that we don't see in the solar system that are different. And the fundamental question of why is it in the plane of the planets, there is no way to explain it, because the plane of the Milky Way is at 60 degrees away from that. There is no natural reason for the third object to be 1 out of 500 in probability of being aligned with the planets. And so that was one of the main reasons I said, look, this is peculiar, therefore we should consider the interpretation of a technological designer. The second one is, of course, the size of the object. If it's as big as I'm just mentioning, 10 kilometers or even bigger, it's just, it's a million times more than Oumuamua in terms of mass. And how can you claim both of them are rocks? Like, why would we have the third object be a million times more massive than the first object? You would expect a million small objects before you see one big one. That's just the statistics of having many more small objects, given the limited mass reservoir of rocky material or whatever ices you want to put on top of it. So there might be factories that make carbon dioxide icebergs that are different than what people think.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. And they make big packages like 3i Atlas. Then you have to explain, why is it coming in the plane of the planets? Maybe by chance, but it's a small probability. And then why is it packaged in such a big thing? And I calculate that there isn't enough rocky material in interstellar space per unit volume to deliver such a package within 1 decade. You would expect it once per 10,000 years. Nobody among those critics addressed this important issue of how do you explain the mass budget of delivering such a giant object to our backyard within a decade out of the materials that you might expect in interstellar space. And I'm saying we're missing something. Okay, so you can argue with me about what we are missing. Maybe we're missing a factory, a natural factory that will do that. Maybe we're missing something to do with how the object arrived, and it might be a natural process. I don't know, but I'm just saying, it's a paradox. It's enigmatic, and just claiming that it's all understood is really inappropriate. It's just like those adults in the room who told the kid that the emperor has clothes, you just can't see them. We cannot hear you, Brian. Just lost
Oh
your voice.
yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to go through the very strange piece that Jason Wright put on his website, because it's got a lot of attention, and there was a lot
Not from
of
me,
kind
by
of,
the way.
what's that?
Not from me.
No, I know. You kind of just go on and do your work, but people like Mick West, the famous Mick West, who I've had on my show, and he does a good job at certain things. But
He's
there was
not a
almost a
scientist. He's
no,
not
I
a
know he's
scientist.
not. He's a video game designer. He does a lot of things with kind of the perspectives and optics and flares, and so he has done good work as it turns out. But here I point out that he was merely one of the many people who kind of joined in this gleeful dance upon the icy grave of Atlas, which I think is quite bizarre. But the most prominent of the critics, who also isn't an astronomer, a scientist. I'm not exactly sure what he does. I know he's a professor in Manchester, but that's
And by the way, one of the people who apologized for his comments, we're talking about Brian Cox,
yeah.
is a journalist from Manchester who is helping Manchester United apparently, and he apologized on behalf of Manchester City for Brian Cox.
Yeah, well, I don't want to get into the politics of Manchester, city, or anything to do with that.
Because
It's
presumably
soccer.
I mentioned that there are two types of people when you deal with soccer, and of course Manchester United is famous for its soccer team.
Yeah.
There are the players on the field, and there are the commentators. Okay, and the commentators have an easy job; they can just express their opinion. The problem is that only the players can score a goal. Okay, And I'm a player in the field. I'm writing scientific paper every week. In fact, just now there was a paper accepted after peer review to Nature magazine, where with a visiting student and my former postdoc, we were able to show that a passing star might have triggered a meteor shower
Right.
on Earth 2.45 million years ago. And you can check my essay from today on Medium about it. So at any event, just today I had one paper accepted for monthly notices, another one for Nature. So I'm really in the trenches doing the science. And then you have someone like Brian Cox that haven't written any paper on Triatlas, not to speak about other subjects, I think, in recent years.
Yeah.
And he makes statements as if he's protecting science. Now, how can he protect science when I'm the one practicing it?
Well, right. So here's a statement that he has made on that you sent to me, or I found out from the Times of London. Loeb's detractors include Professor Brian Cox, the stargazing physicist. I don't know that that's actually true. He might be a star, but and BBC presenter. That's definitely true. Cox says that although the comet is remarkable, not least for having survived 7.5 billion years, therefore being a relic of a time before Earth's existence, Loeb's theory is a little more than drivel. By the way, what is Loeb's theory? Let's get into that in a second. Loeb, meanwhile, says Cox is a commentator who no longer practices science, that has made a profession talking about what other people are doing. So he posted Jason Wright's thing, but before that, as I mentioned, he did say that this wasn't a comet. He said this comet is
We
a
lost,
comet. He
yeah.
kept saying it was a comet, and as if, that kind of wish cast.
We lost your sound for some reason.
So he posted a kind of a claim. Oh, I'm looking for a teapot around Mars. Basically, just kind of putting this in the same category as that. But the foundation layer for Brian. Let's not talk about Brian anymore, but because there's only one Brian that matters around here, and that's Brian Green. Brian Green, my kid's favorite physicist named Brian. But the claims rest upon Jason Wright, who is a professor at Penn State University.
He's a SETI advocate.
Yep.
And I should tell you, he is the one that initiated the ban. He chaired a committee that banned any discussion on unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, or any possibly technological objects not manufactured by humans, that the US government is talking about. He banned any discussion about that in SETI conferences. Okay? So he is a SETI advocate, but a UAP zealot, basically trying to ban discussion, and he feels the privilege of bullying other scientists who might follow the scientific method in figuring out what UAPs are. Now, why do I say it's completely inappropriate? Because there are two possibilities. Either UAPs are human-made objects, okay, in which case it's a serious national security issue, because the intelligence agencies, serious people, that they have a huge budget, they find objects they cannot explain, meaning they're not doing their job. Even though we put $1 trillion towards the defense budget of 2026, there are objects in the sky that we don't fully understand. And so they're saying they call it UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And I say that's a major concern, that they're not doing their job. Okay, so as a scientist who cares about the United States, you should feel an obligation to figure out what these objects are and help the Pentagon in its mission to protect the nation. That's a civil obligation. That's one possibility of interpreting these objects. A second possibility is they are extraterrestrial in origin. Okay, so in that case, obviously a scientist should do it. So I'm saying it's a win-win situation. There is no reason to ridicule the discussion of UAPs, and in particular, ban any discussion about them in conferences. But that's what Jason Wright is doing. He's banning a discussion on a subject that could be either national security important or crucial, or a major way of discovering some evidence for extraterrestrials in our neighborhood. So I'm saying either way, Either way, he just doesn't have his mindset right.
I
And
mean,
as much as this, he calls himself Astro Wright, I would call him Astro Bully. Why? Because he's using his role as a SETI advocate to bully anyone that discusses the possible artifacts of extraterrestrial civilizations near Earth. And there is no room for bullying. I don't want to mud wrestle with him or people like him because mud wrestling gets you dirty.
and all
And I
these
don't
people, Avi, all these people. I'm reading one from this guy, Hector Socas Navarro, who I guess is an astronomer in Europe, and he calls it how the fallacies behind the cult of Avi Loeb. Have you seen this article? How
there
media
is no
hype.
cult. There is no cult. What
There's a
cult is
cult, I
talking?
guess. Yeah, a group of people characterized by great devotion to a person, idea, or word. Do you think that's what's caused it, Avi? You're so powerful and charismatic. People find you like
No, in
figure.
fact, I have no footprint on social media.
Yeah.
I don't use my essays for any financial benefit. I jog every morning at sunrise. I come up, I read all the data, for example, in the context of 3i Atlas, and I make my interpretation of it. There is nothing wrong about it. You can argue with my interpretation and say why you think it should be different. I lead the Galileo project, which is building observatories to look at UAPs instead of ridiculing the study of UAPs and banning discussions on them in conference. Instead of that, I'm saying let's put some scientific, scrutiny or scientific rigor into the study of UAPs. What's wrong with that? Why is that considered a cult? And why are the bullies not actually a cult where they come together and attack? It's very similar to the impression you get when you go to a kindergarten where a child that looks different than the rest of the children in the kindergarten is very often bullied, pushed to a corner by a group of kids who just feel empowered that this kid is different. So I'm different than they are. Is that a good enough reason to bully? I don't think so. And by the way, I don't like to think of myself as a victim because I just do what I think is right, what is the common sense to do. And I get a lot of support from Congress. By the way, I have people in Congress that I'm in regular contact with, serious people. Also, within other branches of government, these people are reasonable and serious, and they care about what matters, and they are discussing with me the kind of work I'm doing, the research I'm doing, while then you see all these other commentators or bloggers having a problem about it. Many of them are not practicing science. Many of them are jealous of the attention that I get. Why should I be blamed for the fact that I'm trying to express what sounds to me like common sense, and then it gets some traction in the public? It's not as if I'm, doing any sin. I'm just expressing myself, and the public likes it. And by the way, it would be good for science for two reasons. One, if the public appreciates science and evidence-based science rather than paradigm-based science, rather than the arrogance of expertise, if they understand science as a detective story where you can figure out the truth by collecting evidence, it's all for the benefit of science, because it will not be regarded as the occupation of the elite. What those people want is for us to continue to discuss the possible investment of $10 billion towards the search for microbes, because that's what they think should be done. $10 billion to put as a highest priority to search for microbes, zero federal funding for the search for intelligence. And I say that that is not common sense. Common sense says let's hedge our bets, and because the signatures of technological civilizations might be easier to detect, let's invest in both of them. That's what I'm arguing for. To me, it sounds like common sense. For people who want their way without thinking about it, it's a threat. And so I don't fully understand it. And the other thing to keep in mind, these people are obviously, they would argue that we should have diversity of opinion, diversity in academia. They have a problem with someone who thinks differently.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think again, here are his motivations. Jason Wright spells this out, and Brian Cox says that his motivation is that he was really upset when people thought that the LHC turning on would create a black hole, and so that caused people to panic and and do all sorts of things. He claims, and I believe that he's saying something accurate. I don't think that he extends to you the same credit and
By the way,
intellectual.
the chance of the LHC producing a black hole is diminishingly small, because you can just do the quantum gravity calculation, and you would realize that at the energies of the LHC, even if you go to 10 TeV, there is no way that you would excite modes of that are excitable at the Planck scale and create black holes. If you just do a simple calculation, the chance for that is practically zero. And in fact, there are cosmic rays with center of mass energies far beyond the LHC. And when they collide with particles in the atmosphere, we have never seen any catastrophe. So if at 10 TeV center of mass energy, you would get a black hole. Many black holes would have been generated by cosmic rays impinging on our atmosphere. And we haven't witnessed any catastrophe from that. So there are many arguments why this suggestion that there might be a danger from the LHC makes no sense whatsoever. But it's not at all related to dealing with an interstellar object that has anomalies. This is very different.
Well, he's claiming that he was deeply hurt by this effect back in a couple of instances,
Well, so
and
he should consult his therapist about that. I mean, this is not that you shouldn't apply your bruises from past experiences to something completely different.
right, exactly. So I think of it as this kind of hurt syndrome, where the victim is blaming and trying to shame you specifically. Okay, so let's go through his claims, Avi. Jason writes, not Brian Cox. But let's go through his claims, and then let us reveal from your perspective what are the actual explanations for this. Now, first of all, I feel like this is in bad faith from the get go. Let me put on screen if I can here, so we can both be. I don't know why I cannot show the size of the screen here. I'm going to put you on screen. Okay, I'm going to read just the first one. Let me go back to my camera view. There we go. So the very first thing that he says, and he starts off, which I think is dishonest, he says, Loeb's 3-eye atlas, quote, anomaly, in scare quotes, explain. So he's going to explain, Avi. He knows, and he's going to explain for all the rubes out there why we shouldn't trust Avi Loeb. And then he begins by saying that these are not, he puts anomalies in quotes, which is very unusual for a scientist to do that, because it implies that it's not an anomaly. And then he goes through the different anomalies that actually make this thing.
By the way, on many of them, he agrees that there are anomalies. That's the other
exactly that we're going to get to that.
Says,
I have that up on the screen. Okay.
Yep. In several cases, he says yep. So how can he put quotes on something that is yep?
Exactly. So the first thing he says is that Avi Loeb, he impugns your character. He does an ad hominem attack. He says Avi Loeb has many anomalous features that lead to, it might be alien spacecraft. He carefully hedges the probability that it's a spacecraft around 40%, which I don't remember you ever saying to me, but maybe you said it elsewhere, which gives him plausible deniability of the bad faith. Just asking questions variety, while still making the comment sound weird enough that lots of people are thinking or worried it's an alien spacecraft. It certainly gets Avi a lot of TV time and fan mail. Okay, so that's an ad hominem attack, that you're doing this specifically and uniquely for benefit, either attention or grifting and so forth. And then he says it's obviously a comet. Now, by the way, this is written last week, right? Or earlier this week. And what's so unusual about it, he said the exact same thing in July. All these things were said in July. Now maybe he's right, but here we go. Loeb has repeatedly speculated, but look, it has a tail and a coma, just like a comet. They have the gases that we expect to see from a comet. It's brightening and evolving as it warms up, like comets do. If Avi had not claimed it could be an alien spacecraft, no one would be talking about it as anything but a comet. Do you think that's true?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just addressing the anomalies, and I don't. You could have imagined that I didn't exist and asked if anyone would pay. But the fact that I raise attention to the anomalies is not a crime. Why is that a negative?
So he says lots of comets are anomalous, quote unquote anomalous. So he's writing it as if anomalies are common, which is the exact opposite of what an anomaly means.
It's an oxymoron of the same type as the oxymoron that Oumuamua was a dark comet. By the way, a dark comet is a comet that doesn't show the signature of a comet. It has non-gravitational acceleration, but without a cometary evaporation. So a visible cometary evaporation. So, they use oxymorons. They say something is a dark comet, and a spacecraft would be a dark comet, by the way. So, it's really not intellectually honest when you
Exactly.
use an oxymoron. Yeah.
So, but it kind of undermines his credibility. He's saying that anomalous things are anomalous, but this is not anomalous because it is anomalous. It's very circular reasoning. Okay, so he goes and says that many now he then his third thing about the comet. Now he's supposed to be talking about the comet, Avi, and he says lots of comets are anomalous, and then he says consider the messenger, consider the track record of the messenger. The second thing you need to understand about Loeb is he has no training in planetary science. What does that mean? He didn't go to Penn State. You didn't go to Penn State, right, Avi? So I guess you're not
I've written more
capable.
than 1,000 scientific paper, 9 books, okay? And I have a career that spans, I've been at Harvard 32 years, and altogether I have a career that spans about 40 years in physics. Half of the modern history of physics I witnessed. For him to say you need a training in a very specific discipline to say anything about this subject is ridiculous. Look at Richard Feynman. He went to the committee that examined the Challenger when he was no engineer. Okay, he was he didn't have any of he was just a physicist that knew the basic laws of physics, and he figured it out with the O-ring. So what's the point here, that you need to be an engineer to figure out the O-ring? There were lots of engineers that within NASA at the time, and only Richard Feynman figured out what really happened.
And just like he says he uses anomalies and admits that it's anomalous, he says, I am not. He, Jason Wright, is also not a planetary scientist. So,
What a
okay.
ridiculous.
But he's
By the way,
paper.
that comes back. Let me repeat this sentence. That the foundation of science is the humility to learn, not the arrogance of expertise. And what I mean by arrogance of expertise is exactly what Jason is highlighting: the arrogance of expertise. Only
He
the
says that
experts will
I'm
tell
not
you.
aware of Avi ever admitting he got something wrong with respect to 3i Atlas and retracting a claim. That's very bizarre, Jason, because this is not, we only have gotten the data, and some of the data has not yet come in from HiRISE, etc. So what is there to retract exactly? You did describe how you can have an anti-tail. You described how it can be an optical illusion, which I'm
Yeah.
sure he must know. And then you described that this is not an optical illusion. So that is strange. And then he says, we expect 3i Atlas to be anomalous. This is only the third interstellar object we've seen. And by the way, 2 of those so let's say Avi was a UFO grifter. Okay, I'm not saying, God forbid, has v'shalom. I'm not saying this is true. Let's say you were, Avi. You know what would have been great? You know what would have been great in a low information environment? If you said Borisov is also a
Right.
interstellar piece of technological kit. Did you say that, Avi? I don't remember you
Never,
saying that. But
ever. I
that would
never,
have been the
ever,
best time for you to say that. In fact,
never,
I
ever.
pressed
And
you.
also, with respect
Yeah.
to 3i Atlas, I'm saying there are tests that we will do in the coming weeks that will definitely show us the nature.
And he
I'm
wants you to
not.
retract now, though. But Avi, you must retract right now. You must admit that you're wrong right now before the data has come in fully from HiRISE, from other things. And
Right.
and we should just move on and never listen to you again, I assume.
Well,
So,
move on and ban any discussion on UAPs in conferences, right?
right.
Yes.
And you
And that,
so
that, is, that is the intellectual integrity of modern science, right?
well, he says that you have no integrity in some sense. He's saying that you're doing this all by yourself. Avi, have you written a single paper on 3i Atlas by yourself as a lone sole
One.
author?
One,
One.
but I wrote altogether 12 papers, and all the other 11 of them were with co-authors, and many of them were just accepted for publication after peer review. And gladly, Jason Wright was not one of the reviewers.
Exactly, right. Okay, so consider the track record. So it's an ad hominem attack. Science is very forgiving. So he's consulted with experts like Stephen Dash, Mike. By the way, Avi, hold on 1 second. What does a planetary scientist, someone who studies Jupiter, someone like Konstantin Batygin or Mike Brown, both very good friends of mine. In fact, my episode with Mike Brown won the Best Science Episode of the Year at the Signal Awards last year. Thank you, everybody. And a reminder, you can get a meteorite if you're like me or Avi. Go to brianking.com/edu. You'll win a meteorite for U.S. educationally based institutions. But Avi, when we talk about people, let's say like Konstantin Batygin or Mike Brown, They're planetary scientists. They're at
Yes.
arguably the top
Well,
institution in the world.
I can
What?
tell you, Konstantin Batygin was a postdoc next door to my office.
Yeah.
And before he went to Caltech as an assistant professor, and we had a lot of discussions. And a year and a half ago, we had a conference celebrating 20 years to the Institute for Theory and Computation, for which I serve as director still since the time that he was there. And so he was completely focused on a talk that I gave about Oumuamua, and came to me afterwards and said how impressed he was with my integrity in discussing the subject in an innovative way.
Yes.
Okay, that's Konstantin Batygin. He knows the bruises that he's suffering for talking about Planet 9. And that is a simple variation on things we know already. But
my question is a little bit more nuanced than that, to give myself credit. It's that Stephen Desch, for example, or or Konstantin Batygin, my friend, or Mike Brown, my friend. If they were asked about 3i Atlas, they check Jason Wright's box of being planetary scientists, but they have no subject matter expertise with this because who does have who studied these things in graduate school, Avi? I mean, you teach them in graduate school. Nobody did, because the first one was discovered as Oumuamua in 2017. So who could be like an expert in extrasolar, interstellar? Now, people have made theory. You've written more about this. You predicted stuff like this before 3i Atlas, long before it was born. Long before many of the critics were born. Go ahead. Sorry.
I wrote the first paper that forecasted interstellar objects, how many of them we should find. There was a paper that I wrote with Ed Turner at Princeton, 2008.
Yes.
And that was the first suggestion that interstellar objects may be found. So I pioneered the idea that interstellar objects may be found. Then the first one was found by the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii in 2017. So I wrote papers about that. I wrote papers about 3i Atlas, and I'm just trying to figure these out. I have no agenda whatsoever. You just have to understand my mindset, because I worked in cosmology for 3 decades, and in cosmology, there are many things that are not understood. We don't know what the nature of dark matter. We don't know what the initial conditions of the universe were, at very early times. We
trying to figure that out with the Simons observatory.
There is a lot that we don't know, and what you learn from that is, that we should appreciate innovative ideas that can be tested experimentally. So cosmic inflation is one such idea. There are many others to do with the nature of dark matter, and I'm coming from that culture where it's celebrated to think outside the box. It's completely celebrated. Nobody bans a talk about a specific type of dark matter within a conference in cosmology. Then I get to this subject where everyone is convinced that whatever comes to the solar system from outside must be rocks. And they will ban talks about something else. They would prevent publication, and they would ridicule in public whoever discusses something different than a rock. And I find that to be completely unacceptable in the context of an open discourse in science. It's really unfortunate, because it suppresses innovation. It suppresses the ability for us to gain new knowledge in this context. And we know, by the way, I think of these experts as AI systems that are trained on a limited data set. So when you have an AI system and you train it just on comets, it will say that any object you see in the sky must be comets. That's the way they operate. And I'm saying something really simple to Jason Wright and all the others. I'm saying, add another class of objects to your training data sets. These are the objects that humanity launched to space. There are spacecraft. Now imagine humanity in 1 million years. They might launch bigger spacecraft that go longer distances. Within 1 billion years, they will cross the Milky Way galaxy. Add that possibility to your training data set. If you take an AI system that is trained both on comets and on spacecraft, it will not have the difficulties that Jason Wright has in accepting the discussion on this second category. He is basically objecting to the discussion.
Okay, so I'm looking up. So he says, so he appeals to authority, which is to say that you should not trust somebody who doesn't have planetary science consultations, if not a degree in it. So I looked up the first person that he mentions, who is a frequent critic of you, again for reasons that possibly may involve.
For the same reasons that on whales you find these small fish that feed off them. So you always have. If I get a lot of attention. my daughter told me, you will have haters around you
Oh
because
yeah.
they are getting to the limelight as a
No,
result
but
of,
right, but
yeah.
Stephen Dash is an eminent professor in the School of Earth and Space Sciences at where is he? Arizona State University. I think it's a great institution. But let's look him up. Let's see what his expertise are. Maybe he has expertise in objects and interstellar objects. Okay, well no, actually he's a professor at the school. He especially studies the origin of chondrules and meteorites. He works on the field of exoplanets and astrobiology. Do any of those have anything to do geochemical cycles on exoplanets to aid searches for signs of life on other planets? He
Well,
has modeled icy
what
bodies.
brings, yeah, there is a common denominator between him and Jason, and that is the attempt to gain visibility out of attacking me. That's basically it.
Yeah. So I'm just pointing out the fallacy of appealing to expertise, and of course you can appeal to authority. It's not wrong just because it's a fallacy. It just doesn't mean that they're right because they're experts. Okay, so here are some other things. We expect things to be anomalous. Okay, so Avi's list of 10 anomalies, going back to Jason Wright. Its retrograde trajectory is aligned to within 5 degrees of the ecliptic. To paraphrase Einstein, your math, Avi, is fine, but your statistics are atrocious. The best takedowns are by Hector Socas Navarro, who I mentioned before, calls you a cult leader. Basically, if someone had predicted ahead of time what the properties of a spacecraft would be like and matched them then, they'd be onto something. But Loeb chose specific aspects of the comet's orbit to compute probabilities of life for after he knew what they were. Is that the classic fallacy and misuse of probability theory that Jason claims it is?
Well, okay, so here is the way my argument is based on statistics. So together with my student, we simulated a whole population of trajectory, like Monte Carlo simulation. You imagine that objects are ejected from planetary systems around stars in the Milky Way galaxy, and you follow all their trajectories, and you find at what angle are those objects coming into the solar system. And you find that 1 in 500 would come so close to the ecliptic plane.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say, okay, if we had hundreds of objects, one of them would be so close to the ecliptic plane. But we had only 3. Okay, so there is a factor of 100 difference between the statistics that you expect. There is nothing wrong with these statistics. Basically says the chance of seeing what we are seeing is less than 1%. Okay, just the orbit, just the trajectory. On top of that, the mass of this object is 1,000,000 times bigger than the other objects that we have seen. Again, I argue that the probability for that is less than 1 in 1,000. So just these two anomalies combined say it's a chance of 1 in 100,000 or something of finding such an object. So isn't that strange? I mean, not getting into the other anomalies at all. That's, by
Okay,
itself.
so here's the next one. This is the next one. He says, during July and August, it displayed a sunward anti-tail that is not an optical illusion from geometric perspective. And
Right.
then then Jason says, it's true that not many comets do this, but it's hardly unique. He also falsely so it's an anomaly that's not an anomaly, but it's an anomalous non-anomaly. He also which is hard to say, by the way, but you falsely claim that he's the first to explain why this may happen when this was understood for 50 years. Did you explain you're the first that it would happen in general or specifically for 3i Atlas?
No, we built a model for 3i Atlas, and that's the paper that was accepted for publication after peer review today. And just to explain, I wrote a scientific paper trying to explain the physics of a phenomena observed by the Hubble Space Telescope. Okay, Jason didn't write a single paper on this subject, so he criticizes me for trying to explain this. I mean, this is once again. I mean, I cannot follow exactly the logic here.
The nucleus is 1,000,000 times more massive than Oumuamua and Borisov while moving faster than both. Altogether, the likelihood less than 0.1%. He says
Right.
this is completely incorrect. You made a math mistake, which I've known you for 20 years.
Well, the paper was published, it was reviewed by the editor, was published with these numbers. There was a follow-up paper by Daryl Seligman making exactly the same point. So I can give you the
agreeing with
paper.
you, agreeing not with Jason.
Agreeing with me, yeah, the same point that there is a problem with the mass budget. Unless the object is very small. If the object is less than a kilometer in size, everything is fine. I'm talking about an object of order 10 kilometers, okay, in diameter. That's where the discrepancy arises. If
Hmm.
the object, and I said in my paper that I published on this subject, if the object is less than a kilometer, then of course everything is okay. But the difference between 1 kilometer and 10 kilometers
Hmm.
is 1,000 in mass. We're talking about 1,000 times bigger
Right.
in mass. And by the way, Dave Jewett saw my paper and referenced it in his papers, and nobody pointed out any arithmetic mistake in what I did.
Good. Okay. Then his next claim is that its arrival time, you claim, is fine tuned. You didn't say it was fine tuned, that the arrival time was fine tuned. You said that there was a probability of approaching perihelion being observable of 5,000ths of 1%. So he claims that this is hardly anything surprising about a comet in the ecliptic passing by some of the planets. Now, I'm a stupid experimental cosmologist, Avi, so please
Let
forgive
me
me.
explain. Let me
Hold on,
explain.
hold on. Well, let me just say one thing, Avi, because even I'm a humble cosmologist that builds telescopes. You've been to, you've heard about a lot of them, right? That I've built and will continue to build. But he's saying that there's hardly a Desh is saying that there's hardly something surprising about a comet in the ecliptic passing by some of the planets. Avi, wait a second. That's true of comets in our solar system. Is that to be expected from something of a completely random object from a completely different solar system? Again,
So
I'm just asking
yeah.
questions.
So here is, well, that's apparently a sin to ask questions, but here is the calculation. We say, let's adapt the trajectory that it takes, okay, and only vary the time of arrival to perihelion. So in other words, we are randomly playing with the arrival time to perihelion. Then only 1 in 20,000 cases gets so close to three planets like Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. We tried that, and the reason is simple, because those planets, like Jupiter, and Mars, they are moving around the sun over a period of years, and their orbital period is somewhere between 1.5 to 5 times the Earth-Sun separation. So you want the object to pass within a fraction of an astronomical unit to a planet that moves around, across a region that is a few times the Earth-Sun separation. And you just do the math, and you find that the probability of it coming so close to those is very small. Now, it may be a coincidence, fine. But I was talking before about two other anomalies that by themselves are already giving you a probability of 1 in 100,000. So are we arguing that it's a probability of just 1 in 100,000 and not 1 in a billion? Is that really the argument, that it's not as unlikely as
But
a
but my
billion?
my my question is a little bit more simplistic, Avi. It's that he's making quotes about he's basically saying, "Oh, duh, Avi, a comet in the ecliptic passes by planets." That is 100% true for objects in our solar system. But to my knowledge, again, simple just reasoning, an object from a completely different solar system, which everyone, Jason Wright, Stephen Dash, Brian Cox, Michio Kaku, Kim Kardashian, they all agree that this object came from another solar system. What are the odds of that one entering into our solar system in our ecliptic? I think that's a fallacy
Well,
that
that's
Desh is
exactly my
making.
point.
As
Yeah.
esteemed as Desh is, I think that he made a mistake. Now, I didn't look at the links and everything. I only have so much time, and I've got a
We
thriving
didn't make
career myself. But
I, I,
but
did,
tell
I
me,
didn't
Avi,
make
am I
no.
wrong? Am I
No,
wrong?
you're not. And that's exactly my argument. And he should publish a paper if he has a simple quantitative argument why this should have happened.
So, okay, the next one he's going through is, let's see if I can get this one up. Okay, 5. Its gas plume contains much more nickel than iron, as nickel is so including boron with likelihood below 1%. Then he says, so we're only up to item 5. 3 of them have been true anomalies that even Professor Wright would admit as being an anomaly. He says this is a genuine anomaly in the sense that it's an extreme value, but it's also something that's very consistent with what we know about comets, because and he says there's no standard iron to nickel ratio or nickel to cyanide ratio in comets. They vary a lot. We're seeing 3 at a much larger distance from the sun than we normally look for it. and pretty standard chemistry can explain why it will have a large anomaly out there. So, okay, so, but he already said you should admit that you're wrong, but now he's saying we need more data. So, which is it, Jason? I mean, you said like Avi should retract all of his claims and hang his head in shame and be thankful he doesn't meet Bruno's fate. But now you're saying that we expect it to come into line as it heats up, but it has come into, it's not heating up anymore, right, Avi? So why is this not an anomaly? Let's see if we can
Well,
make sense of
it
what.
is an anomaly. We find mostly nickel in industrially produced alloys, and we just don't know if a process like the carbonyl pathway that we use in the industries exists in nature. And if you look at those papers, they basically say we know about nickel without iron and through the carbonyl process, and maybe the same process that we use in our industries also operates in nature. That's what they are suggesting, and I'm just saying it's an anomaly. Okay, so let's just admit that, and maybe we will figure out why. But usually, what happens is nickel and iron come together because they are produced by exploding stars, and you can't just separate them unless you have a process similar to the one we use in industries, and these are the nickel alloys used for aerospace applications.
Mm-hmm.
So what's wrong about discussing that as a possible technological signature?
Okay, here we go. Now we're up to, I think we've counted 4 that are truly anomalies, even that he says is true. But these are quote anomalies, Jason, right? You're trying to scare everybody. Avi's made some blunders, and what he calls anomalies are not anomalies. Here's a 4th one. Its gas plume only contains 4% by water. And then he says, yep, that's weird, but not unheard of for comets, though. 3i Atlas is outgassing all the normal things, and the fact that it's outgassing all those things says it's a comet. Some comets are weird, and we expect this one to be weird. Weird is a synonym for anomalous, correct, Avi?
Right. My question is really simple. If you want to follow this logic that he's using, just imagine a real spacecraft that is coated with some ices that were collected along its journey, and it's shedding them off as a result of sunlight illuminating the object. And it has also some means of propulsion or some means of generating energy in order to activate whatever it has inside of it. And so just imagine an object like that and say, when would Jason actually notice that this is not an icy rock? He will argue whatever we see must be the result of a natural process, irrespective of whether we've never seen it before, irrespective of whether the chance of this spacecraft to fly straight on a reconnaissance mission is very
Right, we
small.
shouldn't even be thinking about it, Avi. You're for shame. Tisk, tisk. We should not even be looking at this, Avi. This is beyond the pale, even for you. Okay.
But just think about the fact that he wants to ban discussions in conferences, and on 3i Atlas wants to ban discussions. Now, what does it remind you if you go back centuries ago? What does it remind? It reminds you of the clergy. Now, he is pretending to protect science by doing the work of the clergy.
Right. The index. He's putting you on the index of banned topics, Avi. No, I again, he's an eminent scientist. People have respect for him. He runs the center.
But
He's probably as good to his mom and his dog. But this is not scientific in nature. I feel like it's, and I'm not going to impugn his. I'm going to give him more credit than he seems to give you. I'm not going to impugn why is he doing this. What reasons would he do this? I'm not even going to ask you to speculate. Okay, next one, Avi, because this is near and dear to my heart. Has negative extreme polarization, unprecedented from all known comments, including to Borisov. Likelihood, and then he says, guess what he says, Avi? Yep, that's weird. Weird being a synonym for anomalous. It's normal.
Why quotes? Let's go back to the initial sentence. Why did he put quotes if he agrees? If he agrees to several of these anomalies, how can he put quotes around them?
So Jason, and I'd love to host him. I'd love for him to come on. I don't think he would care to he doesn't want to associate with me, perhaps because I have done these things with you. But I push you too, Avi. I mean, from our first talk on the podcast 4 or 5 years ago when your first book came out, I made some provocative claims to you that, like, one of them in particular, and I remember telling you this, Avi, if you're so convinced that Oumuamua is extraterrestrial, it seems to me you wouldn't be spending your time with Breakthrough Starshot. You'd start your own initiative to look at these objects, and then you later did prove me wrong. You started a Galileo project, but you were kind of I mean, I was pushing back on you, and I said also I'd send a spacecraft after it and try to catch up to you. You said, "Oh no, Brian, trust me, there'll be many objects to come." And I said, like, if I didn't propose to my wife, Avi, I could have said, well, there'd be many women to come, but I would have missed out on the best one in the world, right? For me. So I said that to you, and you were like, no, trust me, Brian. And I didn't trust you honestly back then, but now I do trust you. Okay, so it shows extreme negative. So how many, Jason? How many anomalies would it take, even if they're all unrelated? But just the preponderance of the evidence that this object is strange. And are you truly upset that this object is getting attention? And you're not a planetary scientist. Steve Dash is not the planetary scientist who studies extrasolar comets and asteroids and so forth.
Brian, I just want to highlight one fact that what Jason is advocating for is for the object to remain boring, uninteresting to the public, and not worthy of our attention. That's what he's advocating. Let's forget about this object being important and interesting and unusual and anomalous. Let's just move on with our business and continue to argue that we need to search for radio signals.
Yep. Okay, so now he says the wow signal thing is ridiculous, even though he agrees with the probability. So for what it's worth, it's not as if we know aliens are out there in the direction of the wow signal. The wow signal failed the sky localization test, and I think most SETI practitioners believe it was some sort of instrumental glitch. Okay, fine. I'll give him that. Let's give him that, and let's just move on. Because you never claimed it came from the solar system, the galaxy, perhaps, or solar.
It was just a coincidence of arrival direction. That's
it. So you didn't right. And now people brought that up, and but near
perihelion. By the
way,
I use this to motivate radio observers to look at 3i Atlas, because we don't expect a radio transmission from a rock.
Right.
And I heard back from them, and they said they're on the target. So I'm just trying to encourage observers.
Which they wouldn't have done if you hadn't brought attention to this object. And I put that out, and somebody said, Avi, you're saying that nobody would have cared about this object if Avi didn't make it a big deal. I said, read what I wrote. What I wrote is that Avi has given more attention to this object for whatever reason that you have, but we only have one opportunity. So it's very different than the LHC converting a black hole, Brian Cox, because that's a one-time, event that can be falsified by merely doing the experiment. And then obviously a lot of people don't believe that it didn't create a black hole. Okay, so forget about that. But this object was under extreme time pressure, Avi. It's very different than the LHC because you can restart the LHC as they did. But you can't restart this comet on its trajectory. So if you didn't bring attention to this object as you did, I claim that it wouldn't have generated as much interest in the media, in the public, and jealousy among other scientists. Let's keep going. Okay, here's another one. This is, Jason, it's embarrassing to read this. I really wish you would have the integrity at least to have a conversation with me, if not with Avi. I know Avi's would be up for it too if it could be done and let me know in the comments if you want me to kind of put that together. I'm willing to do that. I've gone through your writing. I've tried to be respectful of what you're saying. I am not mocking or doing any ad hominem attacks. But here we go again, Jason. Number 9, near perihelion, it brightened faster than any known comet and was bluer than the sun. That's weird. And he says, yup, this is an interesting anomaly. No scare quotes this time. So maybe he's run out of ink with the quotes, but it did brighten very quickly for a comet. But again, we expect it to brighten unusually as it's coming in unusually fast, although this calculation tries to detect this. Also, bluer than the sun is a weird way to express an anomaly. The light it's reflecting depends on the composition of the gases of its gaseous coma. No, the light doesn't depend on that. The light that it is reflecting doesn't. That's coming from the sun, right? He's wrong. I think he's wrong here. He's saying the light that is reflecting depends on the composition of the gas. What we see, the reflected light that we see depends on the composition of the gaseous coma. Am I wrong?
I suggested actually one possible explanation, and apparently Jason is not reading what I write. But I suggested maybe it's ionized carbon monoxide. That's the only thing I could think of as a natural origin. So that's carbon monoxide is carbon and oxygen combined, making a molecule. And if you remove one electron, it has transitions in the blue band. So that, if it emits spectral lines in the blue band, maybe that gives this blue color, but you would need a lot of emission. The equivalent width of those lines needs to be very large. and there is no evidence so far for spectroscopy that would illustrate that.
All right, but my point is that I think he's scientifically wrong. I'm willing to be proven wrong myself. Again, I'm an experimental cosmologist, Jason. But you're saying something that's factually incorrect. You're saying that the light that it gets from the sun is dependent on the composition of the comet. That's like saying the light that we see on Earth is dependent, or the light at the top of the atmosphere or wherever is dependent upon what the atmosphere does. But actually, we're talking about the reflected light, which comes from the sun, and so therefore it should look and appear like the sun, except if
Yeah.
there's some processes that Avi just notified.
Well,
Anyway,
so,
I don't want
so
to
that
get
there is
could be
there is
semantics. I don't want to be accused of being semantic.
no, there are two other things that should be mentioned, and that is if there is dust, it would redden the object. It should be redder.
That's
And
right.
and we know the object's surface, the nucleus surface, should be cooler than the sun, and cold temperature are redder. So for those two reasons, we would have expected it to be red, and
Okay.
that's what many comets are.
I don't like talking about dust, Avi, and polarization. You know that.
Okay.
You should know that from Bicep 2, right, Davi? Okay. You should be more sensitive to my needs here. We're going to get to questions from the members of the channel in just a minute, and I can only take questions from the members. There's tons of them, Avi. I love my members. Join the channel. It's 99 cents, not a big deal. It really, I don't get any real major compensation for it, but it does send signals to YouTube, which then will get more attention to the great scientists that I bring on. Again, I'm having Terrence Tao, a Fields medalist, world's third smartest man after President. No, I'm just kidding. Terry Tao's on the podcast, and he's brilliant. He's talking about Trump on Monday on the podcast. You'll get that if you are a channel member as well. Okay, last one. It exhibits non-gravitational acceleration, which requires massive evaporation of at least 13% of its mass. Blah blah blah. And then he agrees. Okay, this one will go down as the most discussion among planetary scientists. This is an unusual thing. And but even if it's correctly measured and his math is correct here, which I don't have time for, so he doesn't think he can do math, which is strange for someone who has over 1,000 citations, was the chair of Harvard, and as you know, the black hole initiative, all the stuff you do. So he claims that
I wrote the equation in my essay. I provided its momentum conservation. It's really simple, and there is no way out of it. And right now, I'm writing a scientific paper that will give the results. And I'm collaborating with a student who actually redid my calculation with much more detail, and he found exactly the same answer. About 15% of the mass had to be evaporated based on the numbers that were reported for the non-gravitational acceleration. Now, the numbers for those for the non-gravitational acceleration keep being revised, and of course, they may go down, in which case the level of evaporation will go down.
So, assuming your student can do math, better maybe than some of our colleagues are doing stuff here. He counts out 10 anomalies, and he says only 4 of them are really anomalous. I count, actually, when I read through the essay, I'm thinking yep, it's weird. Yep, it's weird. Arrival time and so forth. The gas plume is weird. So 4 out of 10. By the way, Avi, if you go to the doctor, Hasfa Shalom, and he says, well, we've done 10 tests. 4 of them are really anomalous, Avi. One of them has a 99% chance that you have deadly cancer. But the other 3 are, they're anomalies too. They have like 10%, 20%. Who cares, right? 99%, that's going to get your attention, especially if there's some false. So
right.
He's using this fallacy that it's the number of anomalies, which he agrees all these are anomalous. Maybe the wow signal, let's give it to him. That's strange or whatever. That has nothing to do with it being the comet itself, whatever. But that was kind of a throwaway thing anyway. But let's say 9 of the major arguments you make, almost half of them are true anomalies. Why would he put it in quote? Why is this like, Jason, why are you trivializing this? And then we're going to move on to questions because I have to go teach. Go ahead, Avi.
Another point that I would like to emphasize is even if those are all natural processes that account for the anomalies, we need to understand them. Why? Because we are missing something. Okay, so that is nature's way of telling us you're missing something, and Jason wants us to forget about it or to put it aside because it's a comet, forget about it, and to ban any discussion on unidentified objects that the Pentagon takes seriously. I just find
happy that it's a comet. He's happy that it's a comet because that's what he thought from the beginning. Let's be honest, Jason. I mean, honestly, you knew this was a comet from the beginning, and now this confirmation bias, it doesn't even need to have any further confirmation to rule out or to even investigate it, perhaps. And at least Brian Cox is saying, well, we should be thankful this is a comet. But again, he also called it a comet before perihelion. He said it very confidently that it was a comet. He didn't mention like, oh, I'm going to go consult with all these scientists. But after Jason Wright wrote this article, then he helped to accentuate and get attention to it. So, Avi, any last words about Jason? Because I do have a bunch of questions.
No,
We've got to take
I
these
don't
questions.
think we should not waste too much time on that.
Okay,
Let's
great.
okay.
Okay, great. So we've got channel members that are asking questions here. So the very first one comes from Chase. I'll put it up on the screen. Why has the tail gone, and why are people not looking at the propulsion being a fusion reactor? Now, you never really claimed it was thrusters per se. You just said if it was technology, it would have to have some thrust, right? I mean, is that all you were saying? I mean, again, I'm not.
Yeah, well, one needs to understand any technological object, even if it's not using thrusters, needs some power supply because there are things to get activated within it that require power. And of course, coming close to the sun is an opportunity to gain power. But for a natural comet, we know exactly how much power was consumed by the surface area of this object. However, if you have some engine, then you have excess power relative to that. And that's a technological signature. So if we see, for example, if a blue color implies a hotspot on the object, then it could be an engine. Or if we see those jets carrying a very high speed outflow that cannot be generated because it's supersonic relative to what pockets of ice would generate, then we know that that could be a technological signature. So we just need to check these properties in order to assess whether we understand the physics behind the energy source of this object.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so next question I want to get, what can we say? All right, that's all good. Okay, so let me get the next question up from, again, you can join the channel as a member and get some interesting questions answered from our guest here. Okay, next question, Pedro Moya says the following. Avi sometimes uses contradictory arguments. He says SETI vetoed him purely out of abuse of power and yet dismisses Brian Cox and others as not being a scientist or not publishing articles.
What is the contradiction? I don't see the contradiction here. And I didn't say
I guess
that
you're saying that, Brian Cox, saying SETI voted you out. Actually, SETI didn't vote you out.
Right? Didn't vote me. I was talking about banning UAP
Correct.
Discussions in their conferences. It's not about me. Again and again, everyone is focusing on me. I'm saying let's focus on the substance that is being discussed, which is there are unidentified objects in the sky, and SETI bans discussion of these objects. Now your viewer is claiming that I said that SETI is banning me. No, I didn't say anything about me. I was talking about UAPs. How can UAPs be me? It's not me. It's the UAP.
I don't. To quote Groucho Marx, I don't think you'd want to be a member of the PSU SETI extravaganza if they would have you as a member. Okay, next one comes from Stephen Daedalus. Avi, could 3i Atlas be some sort of unknown life form, a conscious celestial object, a living entity itself, and not a vehicle? You're the best.
Anything is possible, but we need to examine what the data tells us, and that's why we need to collect as much data as possible and then analyze it and see if we can come up with a model that explains it. And maybe there is something we cannot really imagine, and the CO2 comes from some living organism in it. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, we have to say that's very low probability.
It's low probability,
right?
Yeah,
but
I don't want to dismiss anything because I see it as a learning experience. So
right,
I suggest let's follow the data.
Right. Carl Sagan said famously, my other finger puppet, that you should have an open mind, but you shouldn't let your mind be so open that your brains fall out of your head. Here's my brain. Okay. All right. Next question comes from my friend Peter Halloran, all the way from Ireland. Put it this way, regardless of what it is, Avi has still drawn more attention to this topic than Jason, whoever he is, I've never heard of until now, because Avi has opened up the topic. So where do we go from here, Avi? What's next for 3i Atlas? What's next for you?
Yeah. So first of all, I should highlight again, I see that as a precious opportunity to convey the excitement of data-based science, in the sense that data is coming in, it will come in the coming weeks, and it will revise what we think about 3i Atlas. And if you don't allow for that, if you don't get excited by the fact that it has anomalies and we can figure them out, like in a detective story, you are basically stealing away the inspiration that science brings to society. And people are excited about the process of not knowing and trying to figure things out. So why would we suppress the curiosity of people? Okay, that's what drives the appreciation of science. And the public pays taxes that fund science, so let's make them happy. Why is that a sin from the point of view of academia? For me to engage with the public, that is a blessing, because now if the public appreciates the scientific process because they get engaged in the collection of data, the interpretation, that would be a great boon for science in the future. The
Right.
second aspect is that the public really cares about this question of are we alone? Is there intelligence out there? And therefore, this is a subject that should be supported and funded at billions of dollars, not the small amounts that are used right now. Billions of dollars, just like the search for microbes. Why? For one reason, we want to hedge our bets. The second reason is that these billions of dollars are coming from taxpayers' pockets. Okay? So if the taxpayers are telling you that this is a subject of great interest, how do we know that? From the millions of readers that I have to my essays. I know that. I'm getting millions of readers per month to my essays. I've never had that, just because I'm talking about the possibility that we might discover extraterrestrial
Yeah, that's
intelligence.
right. Okay, so the next one comes from MB114. New member: would an advanced civilization modify a massive comet as a spacecraft instead of building one, since it's already in space and easy to adapt?
Well, that's possible. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were talking about mining asteroids in the past. I mean, various politicians talked about it, and NASA administrators talked about it. And so the next step would be, perhaps to hollow out a natural object, and it would serve as a Trojan horse. Because if you are worried about something bad happening along the path, then when you have this, envelope that protects you within the interior of a natural object, then no civilization would suspect that this is a technological object, and that would be to your benefit. And you often say, Brian, don't judge a book by its cover. And so it's possible that and we know that a Trojan horse was able to get into the city of Troy and achieve its goal. And so that is a tactic that could definitely be used by a technological civilization.
Mm-hmm. Okay, coming to the end, we still have a couple more minutes to ask questions. Again, you have to be a member of the channel to ask questions. You don't have to be a member of the channel to win one of these fragments of a real asteroid. Guaranteed, Brian Cox, to be an asteroid fragment from older than the Earth. It's about 4.3 billion years old. Get that, briankeating.com/YT. Or if you have an EDU email address in the US, you'll win one, briankeating.com/EDU. Okay, I love to give out meteorites, Avi. It's so much fun. Everyone loves them, and they're fun to play with. And this one's very anomalous. It's got a lot of magnetic material in it. Okay, next one comes from Nami Phoenix. Let's put Nami Phoenix. What's the current Loeb scale of 3i Atlas after everything we know?
Right. So I didn't update my number. From the beginning was 4, because I'm waiting for the data that will come in the next few weeks, and I would either revise it down to 0 if it turns out that, for example, just to give one example, that it broke up to pieces and a significant fraction of the mass was evaporated, and as a result, we know the composition of the body itself. Or if we measure the velocity, the speed of the jets, and it looks like sublimated volatiles from pockets of ice on the surface of the object, I would also argue, since the amount of mass carried by those jets is so big, it must be natural. It would be foolish to revise the ranking right now when we are about to get a flood of data, and I just wait for that data before I update my numbers, probably in mid-December. That's when, in just about the time when it gets closest to Earth on December 19th. And let's just hope that indeed, it's not of any threat to us, that there will be no unwanted gifts for the holidays.
So the next one, thank you very much for that reply. And also, it's a true lesson in scientific integrity. What Avi said is that he's willing to be proven wrong. From the beginning, he assessed it with a 40% 4 scale. And now he's saying it could be as low as 0. Now, if someone was truly committed to this thing at all costs and is a cult leader, I mean, it's a kind of reprehensible thing to call somebody, but let's just say you would never get that. I haven't noticed, the people that claim, that the Branch Davidians or other things, that they were leading a cult, that they admit that they were wrong. No, they just go and bring their followers down in flames. So I think
Yeah.
I think that kind of language is reprehensible. But
By the
let me
way,
keep going, Avi, because yeah.
what about the advocates of supersymmetry that were proven wrong by the Large Hadron Collider? Were they cult leaders? I mean, they changed their opinion now when we have the data. That's the way science is done, and that's what I meant by humility to learn.
Exactly. Okay, Magic Mike says, can NASA alter the photos from high-rise camera after the fact? Could you detect any, machinations? I don't think that's a likely thing, obviously.
No, well, the reason it's very unlikely is because a lot of people are involved. It's really impossible. And these are scientists. These are not government employees. The University of Arizona has a team involved in high-rise. The bureaucracy of NASA prevented them from sharing the data with scientists, but they are not employed. Many of them are not employed by NASA. And, they are academics, and there is no way that the government would have modified the data just for us to be fooled. I don't think so.
Got it. Okay, Gray Scout gave us a nice super chat in Canadian dollars. $14 in Canadian dollars. Wow, that is great. I think I can buy some poutine tonight for dinner. Gray Scout, thank you so much. If 3I Atlas released probes, how close would they get before we could detect the probes, Avi?
Right, it depends.
Is there any evidence that they released probes?
Well, that's an excellent question, because I asked my research team at the Galileo project to monitor the sky with our observatories. We have 3 of them for any unusual activity in the coming months to see if anything came from 3I Atlas in our direction. That is a possibility if you have probes that maneuver and change course and go towards the planets. And the same, I recommended to NASA to look at data from the rovers on the ground at Mars, but also from the orbiters of Mars for any unusual objects that suddenly appear in the sky of Mars as a result of the passage of 3I Atlas within 29 million kilometers from Mars. So these are useful things to do in the coming months, and it's a possibility, but we can rule it out if we don't see anything. Now, in terms of the size of the objects, if these objects are of order 100 meters, we can see them from the reflection of sunlight out to where 3I Atlas is right now if we take deep images. However, if they are 10 meters in diameter, then they are 100 times fainter than we can see at those distances, and you will need them to get closer to us, and so they need to be 10 times closer to us than the Earth-Sun separation for us to see a 10-meter object. You have to realize that humanity, most of the spacecraft that we launched are at the level of a few meters in size, and those can be seen only as they come extremely close to Earth, within closer than the moon, within a few times the diameter of Earth. And actually, even the Rubin Observatory will have a hard time noticing them, because they will spend very little time within each frame, and you won't be able to actually easily tell that they exist. And so for that, we need observatories just like the Galileo observatories, which are focusing on objects near Earth. And we could see meter scale or 10-meter scale objects within the Earth's atmosphere with the Galileo project observatories.
So take the last question before we wrap up from Peter Halloran again, all the way from Ireland. My brother, probably from my Keating side. And Peter says, get Jason on. I want him to answer some anomalies in relativity, dark matter, Hubble tension, black hole singularities, quantum gravity, Lorentz test, CMB, time loop causality. It's called science. So if I had him on, you've told me you're willing to debate anyone as long as it's scientific and it has to be done in good faith. So I'd love to have Jason on. I'd love to have him talk about it. Again, I'd love to have 2 non-planetary scientists. I mean,
but actually what your viewer said is extremely insightful, because that's the way science is done. Science is done by having conjectures and testing them against data. And there is nothing wrong about talking about possibilities like this object being technological. Nothing wrong about it, because look at the mainstream of theoretical particle physics talking about extra dimensions, spatial dimensions in the context of string theory. That was the prevailing hypothesis,
That's right.
completely speculative. We have no evidence for it after 50 years. There are no definite predictions that are testable by future experiments. Nevertheless, it's the mainstream of theoretical physics. So where is Jason criticizing the string community, the mainstream of theoretical physics? Where is Brian Cox criticizing
That's
string
right.
theory? And the reason they don't do that is because they want to be liked. So they would never talk about speculations that are popular within the mainstream, even though they are even more severe speculations than the one I'm making. Because for 50 years you're talking about extra dimensions that were never seen. If you were to do that more than a century ago, you will be put in a mental institution. Nevertheless, there is a whole community of mainstream physics which are engaged for 50 years and getting honors, awards, appreciation, showing off, doing intellectual gymnastics on something we've never seen. And Jason and Brian Cox do not have any problem with that.
Well, it's unfortunately not that uncommon when it comes to things that generate a lot of attention. That there'll be people that are affected by it that have non-scientific criticism. Again, I'm willing to have Dash, Cox, Right. I'm willing to have them all on. As Einstein said, when 100 German scientists said that relativity was wrong, he said if they were really correct, then only one would be necessary. Avi, you do great work. I want to thank everybody out there. I do extend an invitation to all the critics. I'll put links to all their article. I'm not trying to, I'm not Avi's bodyguard. He doesn't need me. He's a big boy. He's been doing this a very long time, a very eminent career, one of the most creative, productive, generative scientists. And we didn't even mention we got to mention for the final clicks we got to get in this last picture here of some say that well, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to sleep in the doghouse tonight, but I was going to say that there is a picture along with Brian Cox of Kim Kardashian in this article that you said. I don't know why she's there, but then actually a truly
Because
great.
she was interested in 3i Atlas. She asked Sean Duffy, the acting administrator, about the nature of 3i Atlas.
Oh, that's
That's why
interesting.
she's in this article. Yeah.
Okay, but then there's
This
Margot Robbie there. So this is totally not gratuitous at all. I'm showing, but Margot Robbie was there too. Tell us a little bit about Margot and your
Well,
conversation with her.
I was attending a gathering where 100 of the most accomplished actors and actresses in Hollywood and film directors, as well as CEOs worldwide, were there. And during the break, I noticed Margot Robbie, and then someone came for me to sign my book, and she noticed that and approached me and said, "Are you Avi Loeb? I really wanted to know more about your research. I have to attend a wedding this evening, so I'll miss your talk." And then we spoke for 20 minutes until dinner started, and she was really curious and genuine about it. And this is just to illustrate the fact that I found her very sincerely curious and interested in the search for extraterrestrials, in the nature of 3i Atlas, and so forth. And I do find people among the arts that are far more open-minded than in academia, and perhaps because they are used to the creative aspect of their profession.
So I'll put links to it. There's also a thing from ES, the European Space Agency today. I'm going to put that in the show notes if you missed it. Don't forget, you can always chat with the guests that I bring on the show. I'd like to open it up because the public, again, pays our salaries, Avi. Without their support and their attention, we wouldn't be able to do what we do, right?
Exactly, and that's why I don't feel myself as different from the public. I'm just grateful that I'm getting paid to maintain my curiosity. That is amazing. How many jobs exist where you can follow your passion and get paid for it?
Very good. Well, Avi Loeb, thank you so much for all your time, attention, and just a good nature spirit that you have at this. You don't attack people. I do enjoy that, despite all the arrows that come your way, unfortunately. Hopefully, in good time, we'll be together again, and we'll have to touch base on on the 20th or so of December, when it makes its kind of swan song and the outgoing coda to this interstellar interloper. Everyone agrees it's an interstellar
Yeah.
interloper. Avi,
Thank
thank
you.
you so
And
much.
we should all remember that we live for a short while. And, what we see around us is so much greater and more exciting and more significant that it's not about us. We have a duty to understand the universe. And it's just spectacular to figure it out, and it's not about us. We keep being obsessed about ourselves and about attacking other people and so forth. But this is very narrow-minded. Just look up and wonder about it. That's it.
And be grateful that we live in a time where we can see these objects, study them, and most of all, get captivated intellectually and otherwise. Avi Loeb, thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.